I'm Jeff Sawyer. I'm the Director of Employer and Professional Network Development in the Center for Careers and Internships. I also moonlight as the advisor for students that are interested in technology. And when I say technology, I mean students interested in software engineering related roles, whether it's in the tech industry or any other industry. Students who are interested in the tech industry and non-software engineering roles, for example, product management. And then I would also include data analytics in that, again, cross industries. Okay. And so today we've got some guests here who live it every day in various roles. We've got data scientists up here. We've got software engineers. We have product managers, and we have someone who works in the market research marketing area. Did I get that kind of reasonable? Yeah, sure. Okay. All right. But before we begin, I want to make sure I test your understanding of technology. So, a few questions for the audience. Who coined the term technology? Anybody? Little history lesson. Aristotle, back in the BC era. Okay, so technology's been around a long time, at least in terms of as an idea. All right. Some more ones that are near and dear to my heart because it demonstrates that, believe it or not, I'm an early adopter of technology. I may not look like it, but I am. So, next question. What company made the first portable mobile phone? It wasn't Apple. So, anybody? Motorola, back in 1983. And guess who had one? Very stylish flip phone. Very nice. Okay, next question. What was the name of the first spreadsheet software? And it wasn't the one you're familiar with. Yeah, yes. VisiCalc, yes. When was it? When was it released into the public?
82, 83.
Very good. He's excellent. Make sure you talk to this man. He knows his tech. Okay, last one. When was the Macintosh computer first released? What year? Anybody?
84.
Yeah. Oh my God. See, so clearly they are experts. And and guess we use that too. Back in the All right, a few fun facts to get us going. The industry globally is $5 trillion, so it's pretty big, pretty sizable. The US is the largest segment of the global industry. It's about a third of that 5 trillion. It represents the tech space represents about 10% of the US GDP, so reasonable size. All right, and there are 12 million employed in the tech industry and then also in technical roles in other industries in the US. And that represents about 8% of the employment in the US. Can anyone tell me what proportion of a graduating class is employed in technology? Each and every year, sort of, kind of. 11%. Okay, so we're actually a little bit above the national average, so good stuff. Let's see, I think I can stop there. So I'm going to transition to our esteemed colleagues who are up front and have them introduce themselves to us. And I'm going to start on the left-hand side with Liz. What I'd like you to do is say your name, year you graduated, your major, and then who you work for, what your role is, and talk a little bit, like briefly, what you focus on in your work. Take it away, Liz.
Perfect. Hey, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Knox. I was class of 2017. I was a double major in computer science and economics. I work at McKinsey now. I've been there for about 4 years. Joined as a full stack software engineer, quickly became involved in cloud engineering. And now I'm a tech lead, so I kind of lead teams across application, cloud, and data teams, helping our clients deliver digital solutions and change kind of how they ship digital products. Happy to be here.
Pete.
Hi, everybody. My name is Pete McSherry. I graduated in 2006. I studied economics and minor in philosophy. I work for Epsilon, where I'm an SVP in their analytic consulting group. Our company makes technologies. We help marketers advertise and solve some of their marketing problems. And the group that I work in is kind of like a consulting agency within. So we help our clients use our tech, but we also help them use other tech in their stack to solve their marketing business challenges. Relying mostly on data analytics, data scientists to help us.
Hi folks, my name is Dan Kelley. I graduated in 1999. I might be the elder here. Horrifying. Political science in German. You can ask what political science has to do with working in big tech, and it's not a completely insane question. I manage the Linux kernel engineering team at Meta currently. The through line for me has been working on in big tech on what we would call like hyperscalers, people with very large data centers and a lot of computers, and building and managing engineering teams that look after some aspects of that.
John Bowllan, graduated class of 2019, math major, currently work at a wearables company called Loop, based out of Austin. They make this, it's kind of like the Fitbit. And right now I'm a tech lead on for data science. So I focus primarily on traditional data science, building different machine learning models, running analyses, but then also putting our different models and products into production so that our users can benefit from them. So.
I'm Meghan Weber. I was class of 2007. I have a BA in history from MID. I'm currently at Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud compute business portion of Amazon. My current role there is as a product manager. And I specifically manage new products for our aerospace and satellite business segment, which is kind of fun and exciting. So developing that new cloud services and solutions for that specific business.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris. I guess I was 2011 graduate of Middlebury, and I majored in economics and German. And now I work at Amazon on Alexa. I'm an applied scientist, which is kind of a hybrid research and implementation role. So half of my time is focused on research, writing papers for publication, and the other half is focused on like creating solutions for production.
Super, thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. We're going to talk in really 3 stages. The first one is what's going on out there in the tech industry today. What are some of the dynamics that you're living through? Second portion will be really focused to the future. What's hot? What things are growing out there in the world, technology-wise, that you may want to pay attention to. And then the third is really, okay, given that future, what are the likely opportunities for students who are interested to be thinking about the various opportunities? And most importantly, what would you do to prepare yourself, to position yourself to get at those opportunities? So let me just start with, tell us what's going on out there today, and I'll kind of give you a softball, I'll tee it up. The workplace environment. So during the pandemic, we know what happened in terms of working in the office versus no one being in the office. So let me just do a quick poll of you up front. How many of you are working completely remotely still today? Raise your hands. Mostly, okay. How many have a kind of a defined hybrid model in their work?
Not defined.
We'll call it a hybrid. Okay, and so I tell you, none of you are fully back 5 days a week in the office. On that note, so what is the latest thinking in terms of your organizations relative to return to office versus hybrid versus continuing remote? I'll throw that out to anybody who wants to jump in. Megan.
I can jump in with our Amazon guys. At the CEO level, they've left it up to teams to dictate what works best for them. I know that can pan out in a number of different ways by the director level and business area, but at least from what I've seen around AWS, it's been fairly self-led. I think leaders have done a decent job at understanding what their employees need. I think we all got a degree of flexibility when we started to stay home and work. And I think in turn, employers got a few extra hours out of us. So there's trade-offs to be made depending on where you're working and when you're working. And for me personally, I work from home in Manhattan, so I'm only 15 minutes from the office. I just don't know how I used to get there.
It's such a hardship.
Yeah, it's a real hardship. But the trade-off I make is that I will, travel to customer sites. So for customer meetings, and when I was in more of a consulting based role, that was kind of the driver of my schedule anyway. So it's pretty flexible. I don't know if the winds will change, but I think at least during the great resignation, I think people were calling it, a lot of tech job candidates had the upper hand in terms of dictating where they wanted to work as individuals.
So let me go right to Dan from Meta.
We want 50% of the company to be full-time remote by 2025. Now, editorializing that with no real plan to get there, just kind of like, let's see if natural experiments have us wind up there.
Yep.
But for me personally, and I'll echo the comment about like, there's probably a lot of variance by like particular VP or managing directors. But it's been refreshingly pragmatic. So I'm kind of like, okay, let's look at the teams, let's look at what they actually do. Do they have client interactions? And that's okay, then you're gonna have to go still do those things. Are they a bunch of software engineers who are used to interacting asynchronously and there's actually no benefit to them being in the office? Like, okay, then fine, we won't, try and push anymore. So far, it's been pretty good. I think echoing what you were saying about, the leverage was one way in the market for technical people last year in a pretty extreme way. It's probably swinging back in the other direction now. So like,
Yeah.
How will that affect things in a year or two? Like, I don't know. It seems very uncertain.
Cool.
Yeah, Whoop's about 500 people, so not as big as the Fang or Mang company. And our CEO and executive leadership are of the opinion that we should be in the office more so than not. I think they're committing semi-permanently to the hybrid model, like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the office, and then Monday, Friday, you could be at home. I've experimented with being, remote and in person as everybody else has, and I can see why they want people to be in the office. There's a lot of camaraderie that's hard to, replicate online, and we're sort of at the stage right now where they want to, onboard as many people as possible in person, build a company culture, and that may be different when one day maybe we're 5,000 people, and maybe we have to scale and support more remote employees. But I think right now they're committing to everybody being in Boston, but there are certain downsides in that it can be harder to attract talent because now everybody, more engineers, let's say, want to be remote. And if we're a hard no on remote, then there may be certain very talented engineers who'll just say no because they don't want to move to Boston. Even though Boston is one of the tech hubs, it's not like, San Francisco, New York, probably on the size of like Boston.
Okay. Now, how about on the consulting end of the spectrum?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've seen, kind of different clients take different approaches. So it's very flexible and kind of fluid, kind of depending on what our clients do. We typically adopt that model. So if that's sometimes traveling to client side when they're in person or, kind of if there are big workshops that are in person, some people go, and also there's the option for virtual. So it's very much hybrid right now. And, so kind of a combination between remote, a little bit of traveling, a little bit of co-location here and there, and kind of then client team by client team based on the client current status of what they're doing.
So my company, Epsilon, we're like 8 to 10,000-ish, but we are owned by an even bigger global marketing organization called Publicis, and they have 80,000 employees. My company, pre-pandemic, kind of had a distributed workforce, and so when pandemic came, we were kind of used to doing some hybrid stuff already, so that was kind of natural. Our parent company did surveys, and they asked everybody what was good for them. Some young families couldn't go to the office. They didn't have childcare. They needed to be home with the kids. Other young individuals right out of school were lonely in their apartments and wanted to go back to the office and be with peers and friends. And so they kind of allow to choose what's right for you, and we'll make it safe in the ways that we can for everybody. And that has lived through. So today, there is pressure to want people to go back to the hybrid versus fully remote for things like culture building, knowledge share. Sometimes you're afraid on a Zoom to say, hey, I don't really know what that means, but when you're in your person, like, hey, what does that mean? You know, there's some learning that happens there from a productivity standpoint. But I would say it's mostly remote with some more back to office action.
Okay, so it sounds like the answer is it depends. There you go. Okay. All right. All right, so let's move from the easy softball we served up, and let's talk about a harder topic of what's going on right now. And my sense, because I do a lot of reading and a lot of listening, what's going on the hiring front because of the economy. The backdrop, the reason I say confusing, is earlier in the year, there were reports that hiring for, let's say, software engineering, as an example, was up 50% year over year. First portion of the year, this year versus last year. Clearly, that's changed in terms of what's happened in, let's say, May, June, July. So what is happening out there? What are you observing? What are you hearing in terms of employment practices, hiring practices going forward? Let me start with, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's, at least for my case, it's not Amazon specific. I think a lot of companies are feeling the impact of the economy now and adjusting accordingly. I know based on friends across the industry, it seems that like there hasn't necessarily been a huge dial down in terms of like senior, like certain kind of senior positions, but I think kind of continuing to hire has been definitely slowed down generally. I think we talked about once before about like the internship kind of situation. I think that's definitely, I haven't seen any significant change in that. I think that's still something most companies are interested in. But especially for large companies, like it also just depends on where the priorities are at in terms of moving fast to build something new, right? Like one of the advantages of the tech sector is that you can quickly build prototypes and see if it's worth pursuing to actually build a product. And so it's not always like, I'm sure there are general trends in terms of hiring, but it's more like where should we be focusing on hiring as opposed to just hiring broadly across the company, right?
That's pretty much what you're experiencing in New York.
Yeah, my experience in New York, both at Amazon and broadly with friends across the industry. I think one of the things that we've yet to see the impact of, but the thing that might be more reflective going into next year is attrition rates, right? Like as people get nervous about the economy, they're less likely to leave their current situation. And if that continues month over month, then there's less open roles that might have been planned for otherwise. Like a lot of business I don't mean someone that owns a business, but the plan plans for a certain amount of attrition. And if you don't meet that, then you're not actually opening as many roles as you expected to because you still have people less than two. So that might be one thing to keep an eye on. I haven't experienced it myself. You know, my team is particularly hiring, desperate to hire fungible software developers. So
Do tell. Really?
yeah, you have any experience in edge computing? Please come talk to me. But I think also the same with both internship and entry level roles in tech. As far as I can tell, a lot of our programs are going forward as planned. Like I don't think there's any over rotation in terms of headwinds. I know a lot of other friends are experiencing the same.
Yeah, I think that it sounds like it's consistent with what I've heard from previous conversations that the rate of attrition maybe is dropping a bit and the rate of acceptance is going up.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense given the dynamics. How about it, Meta?
So I think what we experience is probably pretty consistent with a lot of the big tech companies, and starts at the beginning of COVID. COVID happens, everybody assumes the economy is going to collapse. And so there was a flight to safety from a lot of tech talent. And for a very brief window in 2020, the big tech companies had access to hire people who it was maybe harder to hire, because there was this assumption the economy was going to implode. And it certainly did in some ways, but one way in which it didn't is all of us sat in our homes and consumed content online and bought stuff that was delivered to our door. And so they actually had the opposite happen of what they expected. And the intersection of their revenues going up in an artificial way and talent being available that wasn't previously necessarily available led to like an 18-month hiring / feeding frenzy for talent. And so a bunch of the biggest companies, I feel like, just hired everybody they possibly could. It's like, crap, I don't know when it's going to be this good again. Now you're basically seeing like the decompression from that, I think, where we're going back to online activity looking more like it did pre-COVID, or we certainly don't have the fire hose aperture isn't where it was like 18 months ago, right? And so now at least we're getting way more conservative on hiring. And I think the external guidance is like, don't expect to actually grow materially next year. So back to attrition, but like, that's probably about it. And then there's this knock-on effect on the rest of the industry for senior people that trickles down, where you have the companies that are setting like the top of the market for a particular skill set pull back a little bit. You know, that kind of has that trickle down effect on everybody else. And that story, I think, is like probably going to unfold over the next 5 or 6 months, and we don't really know where it ends yet.
Now, how would you characterize the consulting experience over that time and into today? I think, Pete, you and I were talking earlier, it sounds like things are good.
Yeah. So 2 things. So I'll do like the right now, and then I'll give a little bit about kind of what was happening during that time period. In the consulting space, it's a lot of times trickled down from dollars that are available to your clients. And so our clients maybe, you know, at that time there was thought that they might be restrictive of those dollars for our services. And so the organization tried to prepare for that, and we knew that there might be some cuts. But I mentioned we're 80,000, so they developed kind of through a website, if there was displacement over here, how to fill the job somewhere else through remote means. And that was a really kind of clever and creative way for our org to save jobs, keep livelihoods, all of that during that time period. But then it flipped, and because of the pandemic, it accelerated the rate that organizations realized they wanted to transform their marketing and their operations. And so demand now is like booming for us to support our clients in that space. And the cost economics in the consulting world are, you've got revenue and you've got your people, you've got your margin in there. So if you're growing and you're selling, you can hire more. And so because we have that boom, we're not, you know, we're hiring as we get that business, and we're hiring a little bit ahead of the curve. Our challenge is more about finding quality than it is about finding, you know, a number of people to apply to our opening. So it's trying to make sure you make the right hires and that they have the right skills to grow into that role.
I'm going to come back to that topic in a little bit. I just want to finish out what you're experiencing in your organization. How about at McKinsey? What are you seeing?
I think that's a lot of the same. I think digital at McKinsey is even from the time I've joined, it's just kind of rapidly grown, and I just kind of saw the same trajectory even despite the pandemic. And it was really cool. Even this past summer, we had this like Dev Days conference where we all kind of got together and talked about how much digital and consulting has kind of changed over the years. And so it was kind of exciting to keep that up. And yeah, I think you probably said it perfectly.
And so I expect in your session this afternoon, you'll be talking a little bit about those changes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say in the startup ecosystem, you know, we're private companies, so you know, we rely on like venture capital, angel rounds, the sustained business while we find product market fit. And you know, Whoop's a pretty late stage company, but and I don't think this is just about startups, but I think a lot of companies in tech pre and during COVID were of the mentality of let's grow at all costs. And you know, startups that grew at all costs were thrown money by you know Andreessen Horowitz and other big startups. And arguably one of we got that too. I mean, we raised like 100 million at a $1.2 billion valuation. 9 months later, we got 200 million additionally at a $3.6 billion valuation. And we grew like crazy. We went from like 150 or 200 people to like 700 people. And it went bananas. And now we're shedding, pausing hiring. We actually unfortunately did a 15% layoff. And I think a lot of companies, especially startups right now, are focused on, extend our runway, decrease our burn, and make sure that we're continuing to, find product market fit. But unfortunately, that being said, we may not experience like a lot of headcount growth. But again, it depends part of it, where, there may be aspects of the business that seem to pop off at some point, in which case they may really start to ramp up hiring for those positions. And unfortunately, the flip side of that is there may be certain parts of the business that you may have to lay off teams because it's not serving the business anymore. I think from like actionable steps you can take or talk to these different people at companies that you want to apply to, like talk to the teams that you would want to join and get a lay of the land of like where's the company prioritizing their budgets and stuff like that. Because maybe there'll be openings and places down the line that you'd like to join, and maybe you can find alignment with that company.
Cool. Okay, so let's kind of summarize and say the current state as it relates to employment, hiring. It all depends. We keep coming back to that. It all depends. So you do need to be aware of the segments of the industry and the types of organizations, and is it commercial or B2B, or is it B2C types of businesses, because the economy is going to affect those organizations differently. I want to come back to something that you introduced, Pete, which was quality. So if I'm a student and I'm kind of looking at that, I'm hearing what you're saying, okay, it feels a little uncertain. What should I do to prepare myself, to position myself? So let's talk a little bit about the quality thing.
Sure. There's like levels to it. So the first level is like the resume side of things, where you need to have the right language to get through that first, like round, that like first barrier. And then there's the communication, the expression, the storytelling, and that like knowledge demonstration that happens in the interview process. But a lot of it is kind of practice, because I would say in your case, you probably all have experiences and stories that you can tell. It's about telling it the right way so that it lands with either in the resume through that process or with the interviewer on the other side. And in a lot of cases, you maybe don't have the direct experience, right? You haven't done the job before. You want the job, so you're going to learn it there. But it's about showing some level of proficiency or experience, right, through an internship or coursework, and being able to explain kind of the qualities in other cases where it's maybe not directly applicable, where because you did X, which isn't like, I don't know, let's make it up. You were a lifeguard and you want to go into software engineering. There are skills and qualities that you had to demonstrate there that may be applicable to this job. So that storytelling comes with some practice. And if you do that well, you can stand out amongst your peers. So that's one thing that I would say from like a quality standpoint, in terms of expression and communication. There are certainly numbers of things technically you can do to kind of boost that up. But there's a qualitative communication expression side that's really important.
I think there's also an opportunity, particularly if you're interested in tech roles or very tech adjacent roles, where I imagine that there's not a heavy focus on cloud computing, even through the computer science curriculum. But AWS, Google, Azure, which is the Microsoft cloud platform, there's 3 major cloud companies. All of them, especially for students, have opportunities where you don't have to pay anything to learn something and be accredited in a certain area online. But I think that even having that little bullet point on your resume gets you through kind of the computer scanning, whatever you've submitted. And that's a lot of, from your consulting experience. And that's also, I started consulting at Amazon as well. I think that's a a really interesting area to start and learn a lot, especially because you're at an advantage in that the old guard folks that have been in software engineering for the last decade or so might not also be proficient in cloud technology either. So it's kind of a level field, playing field from that perspective. So it's kind of a, you know, what do you do in this J term? Maybe maybe enroll in a cloud practitioner course, and you know, just it's all online. So I think that's something I would consider that's like premium and easy enough to do in your own spare time.
Okay, so it's a little bit about storytelling, connecting the dots between your experiences and what they're looking for, getting credentials, important skill-related credentials.
Yeah, I would just want to say, I definitely second the idea of like so Azure, Google Cloud, AWS all have like 3 tiers, and you might even have special ones for students. Like, I would definitely sign up for that and just like deploy some basic app or API that you're building, right? So even just a simple thing where you have like a small data set or something, and you can make an API query to get some result from your data set. Like going through that process of creating that very small functionality and finding out, okay, well, do I need a Lambda? Do I need an API gateway? Do I need a database? Like, what are these things? Like, can I actually talk about them? I think that's super valuable because, I mean, admittedly, it's rare and it's hard to get as an undergraduate experience because you're not going to take a class where they're going to ask you to like use a Lambda or something or an EC2, right? Like that's, you might have like a compute cluster on campus that if you do, I don't know if you do, but if you do, I also recommend using that. Like even just knowing how to like SSH into a remote computer and like actually run some commands or run a job that you can't run on your laptop, like that's super valuable experience. And I think for me, so like I've done a lot of interviewing. Mine's like, ours is like we have like a very like machine learning science depth component and then also like a software engineering component. So for us, like when I look at a resume, like I look to see like if you can like speak the same language that I do, like you use the same libraries, you use the same programming languages. Like if I see those things and I feel like, oh, okay, like this person like already familiar with most of the stuff that we use, like I feel like they would fit really well. I think that can be really, really helpful. So I think like there's definitely a component of like the first like screen from like a recruiter that you have to get past. But at the same time, when it does get to the next person, like there should be enough technical components to signal that like you're familiar with the concepts, but also like it's like a balance, right? Because you don't want to go overboard. You don't want to write like a paragraph about something. So it's kind of like a balance to strike, I think.
One layer on that is it really depends on the specific role that you're thinking about. Like a product manager might be a different kind of experience than maybe a data science led thing. You'll heavy up different aspects based on that job.
I was gonna say, you know, it's getting expensive to, you know, hire additional talents, that people are making sure that, you know, they're making a really good decision on who they're hiring, as opposed to, you know, just hiring an additional 20 people for your department because, you know, you can and there's budget for it. So people are being really careful about making sure that there's a good fit with the team. And I guess that being said, I think you'll get better bang for your buck if, you know, you focus on, you know, 20 companies that you absolutely love to work for, and talking to people on the teams and just getting an idea of the problem space and who the personalities you'll be working with and how you can contribute to that and demonstrate your interest in that, as opposed to applying to 100 different places and not showing any interest in any. Because people will pick up on that you know, you just submit a resume online, they're probably not going to look at it. But if you talk to people on the team and you get to know them and get to know the problem space and try and connect the dots and tell a story about how your experience uniquely positions you to be beneficial to the team that you'll be working for, I think you'll get the same amount of responses if you highly focus on 20 than if you apply like 300, especially these days.
So I'm going to sum this up a little bit before we move on. Quality over quantity. And quality is, you know, what do I have in terms of my dots And how do they line up against what the organization's looking? How do we figure that out? I talk to people in the organization and I formulate a story. You'll tell them, how my experiences relate to what they're looking for. Is that fair enough? Okay. So let's move on. Let's go to something I find fascinating, the future. Let's talk a little bit about what you're kind of seeing out there are potential, based on what you're seeing, growth areas in both the work that you do and then just more generally in the industry. Anybody want to start?
I think anything related to artificial intelligence and machine learning is a big area. Different areas of growth across different industries, and even in the space industry, that's a big focus. But outside of it as well, whether it's, I know our ads business is big into that as well. I think there's a lot of interest there, and I think it's an area that's new enough that, well, I don't want to denigrate people that have like a good academic background in that, but I've learned enough to be dangerous. Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah. I took it in federal course. That and then quantum computing, which I don't know a lot about, but I've talked to a lot of customers about. And there's a lot of interest around quantum computing and where that's going. I mean, that's like extremely early days. So you don't need to be well versed in that. I think you need to be interested in and poke around. But those types of areas.
I think one way to look at where the future is going is look at who has money and where they're spending it, because they're effectively bets, right, that they're making. Now, it's not to say that they're right or that somebody with no money isn't going to succeed and prove that they made the wrong bets. But if you look at where the money is going, right, like ML immediately goes to the top of the list.
Yeah.
And it feels like super early days, right?
Yeah.
There's like, if you rewind 15 years, some number of people at Google figured out that they could make X billion more dollars by going from linear regression to something that was smarter than that, right? And a bunch of other people are like, "Holy shit, they made like $4 billion more, something like that." Massive like wave of people crashing into that. And as a result, when you see a lot of bets get placed, you see good bets and you see bad bets. And so I think the thing that's challenging about ML is there's some things that are awesome and obvious and excellent. And there's a bunch of stuff that makes no sense whatsoever, but it's overall indicative of like, I don't even think that wave is like close to hitting the top at this point. So it feels like a really safe bet. And the other like big money bets are, there's a lot in clean tech, which we haven't talked about. And there's a lot in like tech adjacencies, like biopharma, like what's going on with drug discovery. It's like they used to need to put these things under a microscope to figure out if they had the right chemistry, but like maybe we can actually just model that, right? And so the third place of what's beyond clean tech is just like, what are the next things that are going to get absolutely disrupted by tech in some fashion? Because the answer, I mean, obviously I have a particular bias given where I'm sitting right now, but the answer is like everything, right? Like if there's money to be made there, tech is managed to globalize a lot of markets that previously weren't. And so the money will find a way at some point.
About NLP.
Yes.
Tell us about what's coming.
Well, I mean, it's changed a lot since the early days. So, I mean, I guess like a lot of people have probably heard about like the deep learning that had started a while back, but there were some major breakthroughs that allowed for significant advances there that are essentially like allowing more arbitrary style function modeling that we can do, where we have inputs and outputs that, like, if we wanted to generate text or generate images and things like that, right? And what's most kind of like valuable nowadays is to use we have these huge pre-trained models that essentially often what happens is one of the large companies spends a lot of money to train an algorithm to basically predict like words that are in between certain sentences or next sentences or something like that. And what happens is the weights within the model are being updated every time that it learns whether it did it right or wrong. And if you do that across like the whole internet, you essentially have a way to encode representation of any given sentence that can be also contextualized. And the cool thing about that is that it's an encoded representation that's portable for anything, right? So I can just take some random set of documents that like the model I've seen before or for a different use case, and I can still get a pretty good universal encoding for that can also be fine-tuned on specific tasks. So the idea of using these pre-trained models, it also is big in computer vision. I mean, I wouldn't say that's like the next frontier. That was more like the past few years. But we're still learning exactly what these models know. So like a hot field of research right now is kind of like prompt learning, where we may not actually need to like fine tune these models on specific data sets, but can we just kind of like prime the model to know what domain we're working in before we actually ask it for an inference result? And on top of that, like, are these models fair, right? Like fair and bias is becoming a big field to be looking into, because obviously, like, we encode certain understandings of gender or race or things like that, and that's just taken from these large amounts of training that are text that we train on. So that's something that's also a big. But I think one of the other things is these models get larger and larger, right? Because of the number of parameters that we need to train. So how do we actually like use these without needing a super expensive compute type to actually use it to like build a product, right? It might be really slow or not even possible to run on certain instance types. Obviously, we know like there was a GPU shortage. I guess that's still probably ongoing a little bit. And we can't just be using tons and tons of GPUs to do something that we don't really know what the value proposition is, right? So if there's something that we can do, but we can like it's only worth it at a certain cost point, like we have to be able to use find the hardware that actually fits and supports that. And I think that's kind of another flip side of this is like a lot of the work is also just distilling these models, right? So we have like a huge pre-trained model that's released, but can we build a student model that learns from the teacher model that is much smaller, that can run on these other types of compute instances that is generally similar in accuracy or something like that. So I guess, I mean, there's a lot more. NLP is like an exploding area, but it's pretty exciting to see some of the work that's going on. I work a lot on multilingual stuff because we support a lot of different languages in our platform. So that's exciting.
Okay, so if you're into finding out more about that, you're going to be attending a session on NLP and so forth. Now, okay, I want to bring this particular segment to close, maybe. I'm going to go to you, Dan, because we've all heard about this thing. So isn't it, will it, won't it, the metaverse? What do you think about that? As someone who's in it at Meta, what do you think?
I think the most cynical way possible for me to say this, and I should preface it by saying, like, this is my opinion and not the opinion of my employer.
Yes.
If you look at the very small number of companies who have got to, you know, like FANG or whatever you want to call them, right? They all are extremely strong players in their markets and have like things that they can leverage. And so Google goes and builds Android and Chrome because they want to control the way people get on the internet, because that makes it easier for them to earn dollars, right? And all of these big companies do the same thing. If you look at one of the ways in which Meta is exposed that the other tech giants aren't, it's exactly what's happening with Apple right now. Apple runs a bunch of ads and says, like, we care about your privacy, and so, you know, like, we're getting rid of the bad guys. They don't tell you that they're building their own ad platform in the background and they're going to use that stuff for targeting and they're going to happily sell to those advertisers, right? But they're using a platform that they invested billions of dollars in like a decade in building to maximize their own, you know, business outcomes. So I think the cynical read on Metaverse is like the search for the next platform, because nothing gives you the ability to like monetize, grow, and expand globally like a platform. And so what does the next computing platform look like? The cell phone was so incredibly disruptive that people are probably still going to be making PhDs off of how it changed society like 30 or 40 years from now, right? What's next? There's not that many possibilities. And so AR, VR, something in that space, again, if you go back to like, where's the money going? You look at all these companies, a lot of these companies are spending a lot of money in that general area. So I think fundamentally the story of the metaverse is people chasing the next computing platform, and in a way where it's unclear right now who wins. And so that means it's still potential that there is like either one or a very small number of winners, which turns into a lot of dollars.
Okay. So just to summarize it, I think what I've heard, if I were a student, certainly I'd be smiling because it sounds like there are a lot of spaces coming. AI, machine learning, NLP clearly continue to bubble along and will. Quantum, obviously folks still in the early stages, right? But even in your comments around capacity, quantum begins to play into that. Clean tech you mentioned, clearly, biotech, bioinformatics, genetics, all of that sort of healthcare, science, and tech kind of brought together through data. And then something maybe wasn't mentioned overtly, but policy, kind of sweeping a bunch of things into that data privacy being one. So clearly lots of opportunity. The last thing I would just ask is tech, non-tech roles. As we talk about all of these possibilities, where do you see the greatest growth from your vantage point in terms of technical roles versus non-technical roles?
Not sure about growth, but I know in my experience, typically kind of the team structure at McKinsey is a combination of tech and non-tech roles. So like your product managers, data scientists, obviously, tech focused. And we also work very closely with designers, agile coaches, kind of the whole team is kind of this like very small ecosystem of all these different parts. And right now I'm working also kind of with an operations team, which is really cool to kind of see how our digital products are impacting the business processes and how the client's kind of, focusing on where they want to make changes. So yeah, I think, you can't have one without the other, and it's really cool to see how all the pieces fit together. And there are definitely a ton of opportunities in both your tech and not as technical roles.
Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I was going to say, I think there's going to be a big growth in machine learning operations roles, which is a specific technical role. Right now you have like software engineering and you have data scientists. Software engineers are great at building software, deploying software to production, writing scalable code. Then you have data scientists who may, be more into data analysis, or maybe they like to build models, but they don't like touching production environments or anything of the sort. And then you have MLOps engineers who are essentially software engineers, but within the ML space. So, you're deploying models to production, you're writing, APIs that can serve these different models. And I think there's going to be a large growth, and there already is. There's like 1 million startups that are trying to do this right now. But roles that sort of combine the two or sit at the intersection where you can maybe interface between software engineers and data scientists and deploy data science artifacts to production. I think that's going to be a big deal coming up.
And I think just less on the tech versus non-tech roles at technology companies, but more of, hey, I have a not comp sci degree coming my way in May, but I want to go work somewhere that's technology adjacent. I think thinking about what you mentioned, like the agile framework. So kind of, if you're not familiar with it, agile is the preferred way of software development at a lot of companies. And it's also how, from a consulting perspective, we've been trained to a certain degree to deliver some of the more digital transformation type products to customers. And within that space, there's a lot of opportunity for early career talent. That's a lot of the project program management type of roles where you get to learn a lot and then kind of leverage what you've learned into the next space, so that if you don't want to graduate with a BA and then immediately go to grad school to like pivot, which is similar to what I did. You can kind of do it on the job. You can learn a lot. And honestly, I think learning in those professional spaces is probably worth a lot more than the classroom that I've had a master's degree where you're paying for it, because there's just some intangibles you can't get. Not that it's not great, but you don't know anything about certain common software that your customers are using. The only way to learn about it is working.
Right, so I need to leave some time here for questions. So let's transition to questions from our audience. So, who has a question?
One quick clarifying one. What's NLP?
Oh, natural language processing. Anything to do really with how we model text, I guess is what I would say, or use that. Yeah.
Yeah, how would you evaluate roles at different sizes of companies? So personally, I'm more interested in working at like a small startup, especially with the economy right now. How would each of you or a couple of you evaluate whether you go work at a larger company out of college or a smaller company?
So from experience, I kind of followed that path. So I, at a certain point, started working at startups, and I think the benefit there is you have to wear a lot of different hats. You're hired to do one thing, but you're also doing 5 other things, and that's where I started to make the tech pivot, where I was all of a sudden also the Salesforce administrator at a certain company by way of like, I've used Salesforce before and have an understanding of how the database works. So I think in terms of just like being scrappy and learning as much as you can and kind of keying in on what you enjoy, I think that's the real benefit of a startup, where with larger firms, I think you do have the opportunity to do a little bit of that, but the roles are a little bit more standardized. For the flexibility depending on where you are. Depends on the team.
Yeah, it's a bag of trade-offs. It's like hard to pick in the absolute. And so I agree very much with what you're saying about wearing a lot of hats and therefore getting like forced learning, forced growth. Like if you want to grow as fast as possible, be in a startup that's like perpetually 10 days away from going out of business, because you will just like, you don't get to think, you just have to do. On the other end of the spectrum, if you go work at like a mature technical environment, you're probably going to learn a narrower set of things, but closer to like best practices that exist in industry for that, which is really valuable, but it's a very different kind of thing. The quality of the people you work with will be all over the map too. Like in the startup ecosystem, you have everything from, I can't believe these 5 people are in the same place and I get to spend all my time with them, to like, I can't believe I have to go spend time with these 5 people, right? Anything's on the table, right? Whereas places that have more resources can hire people who demand higher compensation, and maybe the way to say it is like the ceiling isn't any higher, but the floor is a lot higher on who you work with. And so it's kind of all over the map. In terms of timing for right now in the economy, one cool thing that happens when the economy tanks is you get a wave of new startups, because folks like you basically kind of have to hustle for a couple of years, and that that again is a set of trade-offs, and that it's kind of a bummer that you maybe have to hustle relative to like 3 years ago when it was people were just like hiring like crazy. But on the plus side, it's going to give you a set of skills that's going to make you a lot more capable. And it's probably not an accident that a lot of the biggest startups actually start in like the 2 or 3 year windows around when the economy implodes. So it's trade-offs all over the place.
Yeah, and I will say, and that's kind of why I like doing tech and consulting, because kind of wearing a lot of hats is just something that I did a lot of. And also kind of jumping from tech stack to tech stack for a client was really cool for me, because I kind of figured out, I got a ton of experience, and that's kind of how I also got into cloud engineering. And then I could figure out where I really wanted to spike and spend my energy and then kind of be known for that. So I thought it was a really cool experience to not be just kind of like a React developer, Node developer. Like you love React, great, let's do Angular, let's do cloud engineering. So that was cool in the sense where you kind of had a more stable environment maybe than a startup sometimes, but you were able to kind of spike in different areas that you maybe wouldn't get exposure to.
I'll add that. So I agree with what everybody said. I guess from my perspective, so I wanted to join a larger company to get kind of what you were getting at in terms of like, how does like the companies with these huge systems, like how do they actually work? Some things will shock you. You're just like, that's literally what it's supporting.
Yeah, I can't believe anything works ever.
Yeah. But that'll give you confidence moving forward. You're right. Hey, like I know how this thing works, and it's not any like different than what I'm working on now. And I think I feel like I have that even after a few years. You kind of get that confidence. But then at the same time, like there's also like as we were talking about earlier, like following the money. Like some of the large companies have the money to do some of the like latest research on certain things. Like you've probably seen like some of the big companies stand up basically like research departments that more or less compete with computer science departments across the country. And it's really exciting to be like a part of that. If that's something like you're specifically interested in. And I think it's definitely happening more that like even smaller companies are starting to like be at the conferences and presenting like really exciting work. So I guess that would be another thing.
Other questions? Yeah.
So Pete, yeah, you mentioned like interviewers kind of looking for individuals who are capable of growth. What are some skills or like soft or hard skills that you think makes an individual just look capable of growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer it with some examples, but hopefully they can be like transferable across all different kind of situations. Let's take somebody who's studying economics but hasn't done a lot of programming, but they might be interested in being a data scientist or data analyst and getting in that world. Taking the class on that in like formal curriculum is great. That's a choice you've made that indicates an interest, but then doing some self-led enrichment through online free courses, like the Coursera, Code Academy, any of those kinds of places. There's a self-led interest outside of the formal education that you're already signed up for. And then I think it was mentioned like, oh, make it public, share it, show it. And then that becomes an attribute when you get in your conversation. Like, I've really been tinkering with this and I took a class and then I went and I did this extra thing and, here's what I learned. It totally doesn't work, but I learned all this stuff. And I'm going to go, that's great. What we try all the time doesn't work right away either, but you learned something and now you know how to pivot to the next one. And I saw that you took initiative by, going after a passion and interest, and the way that you express how you went through that project tells me a lot about how you'll learn and how you'll operate in the environment. So that's one example. I think there's like a creativity also in my world, in like the consulting and data analytics. I think creativity is a differentiator. I feel like a lot of people can have a technical skill, but having the creative solutioning is like a level up skill that is even harder. And being able to demonstrate that creativity and those qualities, even if your experience doesn't directly apply to the job, taking that quality and transferring it helps me say, wow, they knew that this thing was totally different, but found a way to connect it to the thing that we want to do. That shows some diverse thinking and problem solving ability, and that will be relevant to what we're trying to do.
Okay, one last question.
I wanted to go back to something Chris mentioned, where big companies starting research positions. That's sort of the area that I'm more interested in. And I'm wondering, do you think that looking at going to grad school and then working at a university or working for a UARC like MIT, Thinking Labs, or just trying to get into one of those companies with that research division, if we're looking to get into like the sort of cutting edge on like quantum or 5G, something like that, what sort of path you would recommend?
So I guess so. Yeah. So like I was saying, like a lot of the big companies have spun up these huge research divisions, and I think in terms of path, like basically what they're looking for is like a very strong foundation in software engineering, but then also a strong foundation in whatever domain this is, right? So if it's quantum computing, if it's deep learning, if it's whatever. And the software engineering skills are generally something that are picked up earlier on, and then some people work as a developer for a few years and then go to grad school and end up doing a PhD in computer science. So most people I work with are computer science PhDs, and they get internships along the way, or they may have taken a few years to work as a developer, but then they're like specifically interested in, I don't know, natural language processing for one specific application. And so I think I would like, my understanding is that most of these companies are now looking for like specifically people who have completely specialized in it, because they're actually becoming available, right? Like how many natural language processing PhDs were there like 10 years ago? Not as many. But there's definitely enough now that we have like a whole crop of intern PhD students every year, a lot of them for NLP specifically. And then, and that's also very much facilitated through university departments. So if you went to grad school and you're working with your advisor likely knows somebody in industry at some company, and they would help you kind of work with them on projects either during the school year or as like an intern in summer. And then that will get you the publications and projects and experience within the company to actually join one of those larger research areas. I also know some people who from undergrad went straight to like Google Brain or whatever because they were working as specifically like an engineer. So maybe fresh out of undergrad, you're not like developing the newest machine learning algorithms yet, but if you're working with the people who are and implementing it, like that's very something that an engineer is capable of doing for sure. And that would help you also get some more experience before maybe you wanted to go to grad school. So I think it can be kind of whatever you like. Some people go straight to grad school, but I think a couple of years kind of figuring out, like, because a PhD is a huge commitment, right? Like you want to make sure that's like what you really want to do. And maybe you'll work as an engineer for a few years and you just love it and don't necessarily want to do that anymore. Like it's something that you don't need to decide right away.
Great. On the plus side, software engineering people love hiring PhD students because it's such a demonstrated capacity for suffering. You can look at somebody and be like, okay, I know they're not going to give up. So even if you do things that you go for a couple of years and you exit with a master's, like,
Just roughly that.
well, I mean, it's super common, right? Yeah. What am I doing here? Right.
Okay, so I gotta bring this to a close. Just want to remind people that our esteemed colleagues are going to be doing deeper dives in their areas. So let's see, at 2:00, Pete's going to be right here, talk more about the things that he's involved with. 3:00, Dan is going to be in Hall 20, and his is a little different. He's going to talk about, given all of these things that you heard about that you could go do, how do you invest your time researching to figure out the one that you're actually going to go after? So I think that would be an interesting one to attend. At 3:00, we're talking about how data analytic methods are applied in natural language processing environment. Okay, so Chris is going to do a deeper dive on that. And then let's see, whoops, that's in June, sorry. At 4:00, we're going to hear a lot more about space. What is that all about? Why are we investing so much in space? So Megan's going to talk about her product management types of roles and what she gets engaged in and who she works with in that space. Also, and that's going to be here. 4:00, by Hall 220, we've got consulting in the cloud engineering environment. And then 4:00 in by Hall 219, we're going to hear about the wearables market and data analytics, data science in that context. Okay, so I just want to thank them for taking the time to share their insights and perspectives with us. Thank you.